Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfic. This is the continuation of Keep Your Friends Close, As for Your Enemies. This will be Part 4, Chapter 4, entitled Act 4. 3 days until deadline. 7:12 a.m., 10 degrees Celsius. Izuku watched as Shinso took off his voice changer and pulled down his hood, flopping down onto the ragged couch in the base. All things considered, it was a fairly nice base. A sizable kitchen with long steel benches, a bathroom, 8 small rooms big enough to fit a bed and any belongings they might need for 3 days, and a bare living room with 2 areas, a couch and a coffee table, next to an old wooden dining room table, surrounded by chairs. All in all, everything a self-respecting villain base needed. No basement to tie up heroes, sadly, but there was a room downstairs that Izuku was sure would do just fine in an emergency. It was hidden behind the first few rooms in an old office building, which was nice because the maze of cubicles could be quite difficult to navigate if one didn't know where they were going, and although Izuku would have loved somewhere a little more dramatic, it would do. Shinso let out a long, dramatic groan. Izuku snorted. "Long day, has it been?" Izuku teased. "The buyers weren't too difficult, were they?" "They were insufferable, Midoriya." Shinso pressed the back of his hand to his forehead dramatically, the other hand clutching at his chest. "Whoever knew druggies could be so annoying?" Izuku nodded solemnly. "'Tis truly a tragedy, Shinso. Well, good news. You won't have to be dealing with this atrocity anymore. Now that the objective's complete, we can move on." Izuku thought he saw something flash across Shinso's face for a moment, but it passed as quickly as it came. Shinso sat up. "What are we doing next?" "Nothing big." Izuku took a sip of water, hydrate or dihydrate, before picking up his notebook. "We're actually going to wait until tomorrow. Then we'll send Momo and Tokiyami to blow up a building, Jiro and Shoji to graffiti an alleyway a few blocks from here, and Hagekure and you to assassinate the mayor. Hatsume and I will hold down the base while you're gone. If anyone's coming after the base, it'll be Bakugo, and if he attacks, I should be able to lure him away." Shinso nodded. "So we just sit here until then?" "We don't have much of a choice. The heroes will expect us to attack around midday, because it makes sense to get out and launch another mission a few hours after the first one, but if we do nothing at all for a while, and then do everything at once, it'll be enough of a change to catch them off guard. Or at least, Izuku hoped it'd be. He really, really hoped it'd be. 2 days until deadline. 7:12 a.m., 6 degrees Celsius. Momo crouched in front of a building that she was sent to demolish, C4 in hand. Midoriya told her that she probably wouldn't need it, that her quirk could create charges much more powerful, but he let her have it anyway, just in case. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Tokiyami tap his comm set a few times, probably communicating with their leader. She pulled her hoodie tighter around her, thankful that Hatsume had managed to weave strands of her hair through it so she didn't have to take it off every time she wanted to create something. So grateful, in fact, that she vowed to supply the inventor with a few rare materials next time they saw each other. Inflation be damned. Why didn't the support company that made her costume do the same thing with her, rather than them supplying her with what they supplied her with? It was so much more practical. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a shadow shift on the roof of the building beside her. She was about to take a closer look before the ground shook and she heard an explosion. She looked at Tokiyami, who was clearly thinking the same thing. That wasn't them. She tapped her comms. "Midoriya, was that you?" "No, Form. That wasn't you?" There was a slight note of panic and uncertainty in his tone, enough to make Momo believe him. She shivered. Goodness, it was cold. "No, Raven and I haven't completed our task yet. What about the others?" "Muse and Prism here. It wasn't us. Wavelength and Brachium. It definitely wasn't us." "Well, if it wasn't Magnify or me, and it wasn't any of you, who was it?" There was a tinge of thoughtful curiosity in Midoriya's voice now, more calculating than before. "It doesn't make sense for it to be any of the heroes. It'd go directly against their purpose. I'd blame it on Nezu. But why would he do that?" The team waited with bated breath, as Midoriya had muttered for a few moments, praying for an explanation. "It's probably something to do with the testing of the hero team. Maybe he left civilian bots in there, and they have to save them in time. I doubt it's a red herring. Nezu doesn't do these things by accident, but think of it like this. Heroes never just have one villain organization to worry about. It's entirely possible Nezu's thrown in a few other events to split their focuses and resources." Momo saw Tokiyami switch his comms, listening to something on another frequency for a second before switching back. Then she saw the figure on top of the building she had previously forgotten move again, and she had to shove Tokiyami out of the line of fire as they jumped down, landing in a crouch. "Asui." Momo tapped her comms. "This operation has been compromised. We'll cycle around a couple of times before returning to base." "Okay, stay safe, don't get caught. Also, if you could drop into a small-time convenience store and shoplift something minor to fulfill the petty crime objective, that would be great." "On it." Momo made eye contact with Asui for a moment before Asui shook her head. Too dry for me there, Caro. I'll continue the charade here. With that, the three of them took off in a mock chase through sprawling urban streets. Sorry, Midoriya, but I have to win this time. Momo hoped that Midoriya wouldn't hold it against her. 2 days until deadline. 7:13 a.m., 6 degrees Celsius. Toru hauled herself up through the open window, ducking beneath the awning to avoid hitting her head. It was an old building with plenty of handholds and footholds for purchase. She made a mental note to live in a building with a more sleek design in the future, so if anyone wanted to assassinate her, it wouldn't be as easy. Toru shook out her hands, wringing the cold from them like water from a wet rag. She'd been worried she'd fall for a while there, due to the bout of shivering that had overtaken her while climbing, and that Hatsume's harness would have to catch her. She regained her nerve soon enough, and she hadn't needed it in the end. Shinso clambered in after her, with a tad more grace, she noted enviously, dark eyes scanning the shadows of the room they were in. According to the floor plan Midori had given them, the room the robot mayor should be in was just down the hall, third door to the left. The locks were strong, but Hatsume's automatic lockpicks should deal with it just fine. Which couldn't possibly be legal, but sure. A small traitorous part of her whispered about breaking and entering, but she ignored it. She wasn't breaking anything anyway. A bright purple paintball splattered across the lens of the security camera that was about to turn toward them, and Toru snapped herself out of her thoughts. She had a mission to complete. Thanks to the incredible craftsmanship of her costume, she didn't need to worry about being seen as she opened the door a crack to look at the security camera and down the hallway. A single quick shot blotted out its sight, and she tapped Shinso twice on the arm to signal that it was clear. The plush, velvet carpet muffled their steps as they stepped into the hallway. The lockpick made quick work of the handle to the mayor's office, and it didn't even click open, instead swinging slightly inward. Toru did the same thing she did with the hallway, quickly shooting any cameras with a sight of her before tapping twice on Shinso's arm. Midori had trained her too well. Then, before Toru could properly process what was going on, they were standing before the robotic mayor. Glowing red sensors adorned his neck, wrists, chest, and back, just like they were promised, and Toru knew that one well-aimed shot, and the objective would be complete. She didn't shoot, though. Neither did Shinso. Instead, Toru bowed once, turned, and walked away, Shinso following close behind. They exited the same way they came, closing the awning behind them, and Shinso had tapped his comm set. The objective has been completed. Thank you, Muse. Prism, please try to take a less direct route back to base, in case you're being tailed. Hagakure didn't want to betray Midoriya. Really, she didn't. She just didn't want to be invisible anymore. Not in the literal sense, but in the sense that she just wanted to be seen, wanted to be noticed. If she performed her mission, her real mission, to real perfection, she would be seen by her peers. That was all she wanted, all she ever wanted, why she even wanted to be a hero. Well, her invisibility had one upside. Midori wouldn't truly see her until it was too late. 2 days until deadline, 12:29 p.m., 5 degrees Celsius. Izuku cradled his head in his hands. Resting his elbows on the table, he felt like crying, like he always did when he was overwhelmed but he couldn't. Not when everyone else was due to arrive so soon, not when everyone would see. They couldn't see him break. God, he hated this exam. He hated Kachan, he hated the hero team, he hated the teachers for putting him in this situation. Not really. He could never hate them, not truly, but he would be lying if he said he wasn't angry. No, Izuku was angry. Thinking about it, he realized he'd been angry for a long time. All his life? No, that was wrong. He hadn't been angry when he was 4, playing with his friends in the playground, talking about futures and dreams that would soon slip away like fog, intangible and untouchable. He hadn't been angry when he was 5, waiting for his quirk to come in, thinking that it was just late, because how could he be quirkless? Hell, he wasn't even angry when the doctor told him he was quirkless. Shocked, yes. Scared, yes. But never angry. Izuku couldn't really pinpoint a specific moment when the anger started to grow, to fester, but that was probably for the best. Whenever it started didn't matter, especially when he had hidden it away like he had, pushing it into the dark, forgotten corners of his mind, discarded as soon as he realized that anger would never help him, that being bitter wouldn't make the bully stop, no matter how outraged he was. His father would never come back. No. Anger did nothing for Izuku Midoriya other than getting him hurt, and somewhere along the line he had decided he was better off without it. Told himself that it was villainous to want to punch Tanaka when he called him weak, to want to reach out and grab the eyes off of that one kid who had an eye-extending quirk, and pull until his optic nerve snapped and he'd never be better than Izuku again. His anger turned his analysis dark and twisted and aimed to hurt, and it took everything he had to keep analyzing heroes the way he used to. If anyone asked, Izuku would tell them that his analysis wasn't villainous, that it wasn't aimed to hurt. But maybe it was, or at least, not heroic. His analysis skills suffered, and they failed to develop as he knew they could have. But now, Izuku was being pushed into a position where he had to use that analysis, those thoughts, to his advantage, and the anger came with it. And with the anger, the guilt, because how could he think like that? These people were his friends. Yes, they were on opposite sides now, but this was for training. This was for teaching everyone involved how to be better, not how to twist and deceive and hurt. And that's what Izuku was beginning to do, beginning to become. He was becoming what he had been so scared of becoming for so long. Fear was, at first, a way of repressing his anger, pushing it away into the dark where it wouldn't lash out and backfire on him. Then, as time continued, it changed. He needed someone to pull him out quick. He needed someone to stop his spiral before everything got out of hand, and he started to forget why he was so careful with his thoughts, why. The door to the base opened, and Izuku's head snapped upwards. 2 days until deadline, 12:34 p.m., 5 degrees Celsius. Midoriya's head snapped upwards to look at Hitoshi as he walked in and sat down. Something about the movement, the position Midoriya was in, set off alarm bells in his head. Elbows on the table, something Midoriya never did. How Midoriya always kept his impeccable table manners was beyond him. Shoulders hunched, head in his hands, not even a notebook in front of him. And Hitoshi opened his mouth to ask about it, but the moment was gone before he had a chance. Midoriya folded his arms in front of him, face clear of the shadows that flickered just milliseconds before, eyes bright and questioning. "Shinso, is everything all right?" The question sounded slightly too sharp, but Hitoshi let it slide. "Yeah, everything's fine, I'm just—" Hitoshi trailed off, looking for an explanation that wasn't, "I'm betraying you and I feel like a horrible person and a villain, which is leading me headfirst into identity crisis, in which I question whether I'm becoming everything everyone always said I was, because I don't think I'm doing the right thing here, and nothing about this is fine." Tired. Midoriya huffed out something that was probably meant to sound like a laugh. "Yeah, tired." He shook his head. "That's one way to put it." "Are you—" Hitoshi really didn't want to make a wrong move here. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." Hitoshi almost flinched at the curt dismissal in Midoriya's tone. Unluckily, Midoriya caught the movement and sighed. "I'm sorry. It's just a lot at the moment, and I'm struggling to keep my head." Hitoshi chuckled humorlessly. "Tell me about it." A shadow passed across Midoriya's face so quickly that Hitoshi couldn't decipher it. Midoriya continued fast enough that Hitoshi didn't get a chance to dwell. "Do you have any ideas on what the explosion was today?" All right, that. With everything else going on, Hitoshi had almost forgotten. From what he'd heard, there had been a few civilian robots in amongst the fire, and that the other heroes had gotten them out mostly okay. 14 injured, but none dead. The civilian robots were rare and didn't move around the city freely, so it was probably some part of the exam. I can't really think of anything other than the whole Nezu theory. I mean, it makes sense, especially considering that there was no specification about outside interference during the exam. It does put me on edge, though. Well, that's a good thing, I guess. If we're on edge, we're less likely to slip up. We can't get complacent. Hitoshi tried to pretend that didn't feel like a slap to the face. This was all to stop Midoriya from getting desperate, to keep him complacent. And here he was. "You're right." Jiro strode into the room, pulling down her hood. "Getting complacent isn't an option. Whether we're ahead or not, the hero team is still outnumbering the villain team. Sticking to the shadows is our best bet." She threw a subtle glance at Shinso, a warning. Well-meaning, but still. Hitoshi didn't know whether he wanted to hug or punch Jiro at that moment. "Thanks for the reminder." Midoriya brightened, smiling. The tone of his voice was bright, but for a moment, Hitoshi wondered at the words. They were venomous somehow. Midoriya was the picture of innocence, but that phrase just didn't really make sense. "All right, the plans for tomorrow are a little more complicated. Like we talked about before the exam actually started, but I don't think that's an issue. All we have to remember, we work together, as a team. We play our parts, and it'll go smoothly." Hitoshi felt sick. He nodded anyway. Of course. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 4, Act 4 of Keep Your Friends Close, As For Your Enemies. Chapter 5 will be next. Hope you all are still enjoying it. As always, thank you so much for listening.